Hey there trainers, welcome back. You are with PewterCityJim, and today we're continuing our deep dive into an area of our Fakémon region, Sola. For those who are new, Sola is this channel's Fakémon region based on Southern California and some of the surrounding locales. Right now we're looking at a desert wild area to the northeast of the map and some of the Fakémon who might live there. This area is called the territory of Jasper. Last time we checked out a new starter trio, a couple of birds, a bug, and some little grass-type goobers, and a regional variant. What's up next in our Pokédex? Let's find out together, but first, welcome to the channel. We do a bunch of Let's Play stuff, both official and fan games, and a bunch of art. If any of that sounds like fun to you, sweet. It would be awesome if you could do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Like this video if you like the video, and feel free to say hi down in the comments. I do my best to reply and chat with everybody. Remember, trainer, you are welcome here. So just to give a brief recap of this little mini-series within our Sola content, last year I took a trip to an amazing place called California City. It started as one man's dream to build a new metropolis on the west coast, but wound up as a nice little town with miles and miles of roads and empty lots out in the desert. Ever since learning about it, I've wanted to walk those empty roads, and so that's just what I did. Translating it into an area of my Fakemon region had been the plan since first coming up with the earliest ideas for Sola, but actually going there and seeing it for myself was a must. I spent hours walking the empty streets of a city that never was. I came up with a bunch of Fakemon ideas, and here we are. We started out with a bunch of base stage creatures last time, and we will get to evolving some of them. But let's first get some additional critters out of the way. This next one draws on some US history that doesn't relate to California City specifically, but to the Mojave Desert as a whole. That's where California City is located after all, so I kinda feel like it works to place it here. The US Camel Corps. Yep, that is a real thing. Back in 1836, the first rumblings of this ill-fated branch of the US military came to be. Between then and 1855, you had people working on the idea. First up, Major George H. Crossman. He had fought in the frontier wars and was convinced that conflicts in the southwestern US could be better fought with more appropriate animals than horses and mules. This was a period in time where transport was still mostly done by animals or steam-powered vessels that, on land anyhow, couldn't go anywhere that there weren't train tracks. Horses and mules require quite a fair bit of water, but camels don't and are very heat tolerant. Perfect for carrying munitions, troops, and supplies through places like Death Valley and the greater Mojave Desert. Major Henry C. Wayne conducted studies on the idea himself and agreed with his fellow major, and then another Camel sympathizer by the name of Jefferson Davis was appointed Secretary of War. Boom. $30,000 was granted for the project, which, you know, these are 1800s dollars, so $30,000 is actually pretty close to $1 million in our current currency. That got the US roughly 70 camels over the course of 2 trips, plus equipment and the hire of some camel experts. I won't go over every hurdle this project faced, but the upshot of it is that the camels were used for a while, fell out of favor, and many were released into the wild or sold at auction to private buyers. Their use in the US military didn't last more than a few years, with the last of the captive camels being sold in 1864. And I mean, to be fair, the US was dealing with the Civil War at that point, so yeah, no, there were more important things to worry about than camels. As I mentioned, some were released into the Mojave Desert in California, and they wandered all over. The last reported sighting of one in the wild was all the way out in Arizona in 1891, and the red ghost folklore of Arizona is inspired by one of these camels. For whatever reason, settlers and prospectors and the like shooting them for fun and food most likely, these feral released camels didn't manage to come together and form a cohesive long-running feral population. But, you know, what if they did? It's happened in other places, like Australia. So here we have Sola's regional Numel, a descendant of the Solarian Numel Corps' released Pokemon. Much like Jasper's relation to California City, it's not a one-to-one correlation. These Numel managed to thrive in Sola's deserts, and not only that, but their military training managed to help them change forms into something less volcanic and more cannon-inspired, so that they could shoot back if settlers or prospectors decided to try and take them out. If Blastoise could have some massive shoulder-mounted guns, I figured this guy could have a tank barrel poking out of its back. So, a bit of a confession. Initially, this was supposed to be a grass and steel type due to the camel's tie to a particular plant. You'll notice me putting a flower up there on its back, and there were a couple of reasons for this. In terms of its usefulness for Numel, it was supposed to track targets that the Numel wanted to attack with its back-mounted munition. Kinda like flowers following the sun through the sky. See, there's a bush out here called creosote. There's a picture of it on the side there. Little yellow flowers with puffy seeds that blow in the wind. Nothing really eats it anymore, but the camels that were bought over loved it. They couldn't get enough of the stuff. The US used to have native camel species back in the Ice Age, and they, unsurprisingly, ate a lot of creosote. So it was almost like these two organisms finding one another again after thousands of years. I don't know, I just really love that idea. But The flower on mine looked tacked on and weird, and I removed it. Also, from a balancing perspective, Jasper already has 3 grass lines, so I kept the fluffy gray parts that were inspired by the seed heads of the creosote bush. I kind of figured they would also double as like cloudy, smoky imagery, as well as being the wiry, bushy hair that they were intended to look like also. I wanted it to have a different body shape, so I gave it longer legs as well. Better for avoiding sharp rocks and vegetation at belly height. And here we have Numel, Solarian form, the Numb Pokemon. Intense military training in a new environment caused Numel to evolve into this variant over time. They form small but mighty herds that are very territorial. They can hit a target with perfect accuracy at over 1.6 kilometers away. It's a pure steel type of this stage and fairly large. You have the ability Mega Launcher, which boosts the power of Aura and Pulse moves, and the hidden ability Rivalry, which does more damage to foes of the same gender. This is actually a little reference. In the Smithsonian Museum, you can see bones of a camel that was in the core. During breeding season, this unfortunate male was killed by another larger male to remove competition for the ladies. Poor fella. In honor of this bout, I figured Rivalry would work as a sneaky little reference. Here are your stats and moves. A range of steel and ground type moves with a fair few fire type tricks in there as well, and some shot style moves. Stats are rearranged versions of Numel Classic. Speaking of regional variants, we had one in the last video too. Tynamo. This was the winner of a poll I hosted back in January of 2024. This was our little dark poison type version of it for Sola. As you can see, it's not too terribly dissimilar from Tynamo from Unova. It's beefier and a bit more aggressive looking. It has to feed on the life energy of other fish Pokemon as it doesn't have any electricity to nosh on out here being Jasper's version of California City's Central Park. This would be a place you could go early on in Jasper. Garnet Park. Garnet is often red, though other colors do exist, much like Jasper. Garnet is also the state mineral of New York. Central Park in California City was christened with water from New York. This park was also christened with water from Unova, bringing in Tynamo in the first place. Anyhow, you'd enter into the town, get your new partner, some Pokeballs, and have the place explained to you, then be set loose in this big recreational area, free to fish and march around in the long grass, catching Graven, Ducklet, Magikarp, Botaboom, Meowth, of Tynamo, and various others. It's a beautiful, serene spot to just kind of wander around and relax in. Not that you'd know it, looking at Tynamo's mean face. What could such a slimy suckerfish evolve into anyway? Electric looks pretty different to Tynamo at first glance. Like, if you were completely unfamiliar with Pokemon, right, and you were asked to match them up based on which one you think evolves into what, Electric and Eelektross, that's kind of a no-brainer. You'd pick that right away. But would you put Tynamo ahead of those two? I probably wouldn't. And as such, our version of Electric has to look just as surprising and unrelated while still keeping similar themes. It definitely leans a bit more into those lamprey vibes with a bit of cookie cutter shark thrown in for good measure. It's so bulky in the front half that it's consistently levitating and swimming with its tail up in the air. That part of it's still kind of small. Electric's classic design is a little on the goofy side, but I just couldn't do that to my creation here, so I made this thing an all beef patty. And here we have Electric, Solarian form, the parasite Pokemon. If a Tynamo takes a nibble of you, it hurts, but it's unlikely to cause serious harm. The same cannot be said for Solarian Electric. It will take an actual bite of you. Luckily, they're pretty rare, and you are unlikely to encounter one, except for maybe the one that has triggered this Pokédex entry. Oops. Be careful. It retains the Dark and Poison typing and Levitate ability, and it is quite a bit larger. Here are your stats and moves. Unlike Tynamo, who only ever has 4 moves, this fish has enough range to learn a wide variety of moves with many good stab options. I know the original Tynamo line is a fan favorite, so I really hope I'm doing it justice with these regional variants, and I hope that you guys like them. Anyway, moving right along from a regional variant to a convergent evolution. In the last video, I showed this. It was a bunch of smashed up VHS tapes out there in the desert that I found. I could see something sparkling and moving in the distance, so I walked all the way over just to see what it was, and, well, this was it. I made a note of it because it was so strange, but I honestly had no idea what I might do with it as a concept. So this is kind of an odd one. You guys have probably seen the beta leaks for Generation 2 from the 1997 and 1999 Spaceworld demos. If not, I'll link to the page from the cutting room floor in the description. That's the main resource I used here, so please go check it out. Anyway, within the beta Pokemon we got to see was a pre-evolution to Tangela and an evolution that was later replaced by Tangrowth. Tangela was always such an odd Pokemon in Generation 1, the only pure grass type available in Kanto, and only able to be found in one specific place to the south of Pallet Town once you'd obtained Surf. Like, someone in Pallet Town was, no, that thing's just too weird, wall it off from the town and maybe it will fall into the sea. We only want proper Pokemon around here. Level 2 Pidgey. Rattata. But I really like the little one-eyed pre-evo. It's just kind of charming, and it coalesced in my head with the idea of these loose lines of tape flapping around busted plastic gears. That's right, we're doing a line of convergence that starts with the original plans for Tangela's family line. I wanted to give it a different pose, of course, its own personality and style. I want it to look a bit creepy. This is an Objectmon of the Bennett variety, an old, much-loved videotape lost out in the desert, broken down by the unrelenting elements and eventually developing a life of its own and a mean streak, too. It was left behind by technology. Curse you DVDs! I mean, it's been out in the desert all this time, so it probably doesn't know about streaming yet either. I imagine it will likewise be just as miffed about Netflix, and Hulu, and Max, and Disney Plus, and Crunchyroll, and Paramount Plus. Tubi. Anyway, the structure is just like the original beta design for Tangela's pre-evolution, but with that big tape wheel gear as an eye and tightly wrapped tape around the gear making up the rest of the body. Oh, and little tape feet. I imagine it's kinda terrible at running around on them. And here we have Mangle, the tape Pokemon. An old videotape was once watched over 100 times. When the movie came out on newer formats, though, this old tape was left behind. Pure spite brought this tape to life in the form of Mangle. Feelings of resentment cause it to hate all new technology, and it will attack new-looking machines mercilessly. So, keep it away from your smartphone. Anyway, it's a pure poison type and has the ability Tangling Hair, as when you hit it, you'd be tangled up in tape. Poison, because, to fit with the convergent rule, it needs to be a type that's super effective against Tangela's pure grass typing. Plus, VHS tapes are made of plastic. While polypropylene, the material that was used for making VHS tapes, is actually pretty non-toxic, kinda to the point of being food safe, it's still an environmentally harmful thing as it breaks down into microplastics. Anyway, the name Mangle is really simple, and it sorta harkens back to Gen 1 and 2 naming conventions where sometimes it's just a misspelled word. Seal, muck, drowsy, all normal words but spelled wrong. So Mangle, like mangled up tape, it shares syllables with Tangle, which I'm pretty sure would have been the name for the pre-evolution if it was ever officially released. Here are your stats and moves. Nothing massively impressive just yet, but we are getting there. Trying to figure out what a pre-evolution Tangela would have had as a moveset, and then reverse engineering that into a poison-type convergent evolution moveset that doesn't rely on goops and gases to attack, wasn't easy. But it was fun. Let's go ahead and evolve this little Objectmon. This honestly kinda just goes the way you'd expect. Its shape is very much inspired by Tangela. It has two eyes, and they are still gears, but surrounded by tightly wound tape. I wanted the tape itself to be really shiny looking. Videotape is plastic as well as the casing, though a different kind. That tape is then covered in fine layers of various metals. In fact, those metals are more toxic than the plastic itself. I find it kind of ironic that this is a creature made up of tape that looks like it's been cut, and the inspiration for this monster came from a site called the Cutting Room Floor. For those who might not know, back in the old days, video editing was done by literally cutting and splicing physical film. The cutaway parts would fall to the floor, and the space where this was done was literally called the cutting room. And here we have Mangala, the tape Pokemon. This lonely soul finds it hard to accept any kind of attention from others, especially positive attention or affection. They make it feel really awkward. It will wrap up its unspooled tape around itself until its eyes are no longer visible at even the smallest hint of a compliment. Still a pure poison type with Tangling Hair as the ability. Its stats are roughly analogous to Tangela, and it has a moveset that I think makes a lot of sense. Again, it's a poison type, but it is made of hard plastic, so it's not going to be throwing sludge around or belching toxic fumes, so its stab options are a little bit more limited. Alright, an evolution for this guy? Would it be a convergent of Tangrowth, or would we stick with beta designs and try for a convergent of this weird pile of vines? I do like that big old grin, and I wouldn't want to stick with my current naming convention for these because Mangrowth, that's not a good name at all. Anyway, an evolution will be coming in the next video once I've decided exactly what I want to do with it. Moving right along, I did another poll. This time I asked which of these weird little grass types you'd pick for your teams. Gurr grabbed the trophy, ran away with it, threw it out in a dumpster behind a restaurant, and then spent a few hours scaring P-Dove out by the Pokemon Center. All in all, kind of an average day for this little monster.
Or, that was the case when this script was written and recorded. It is no longer the case, so I apologize.
It somehow managed to garner enough XP to evolve as well. The concept behind this creature is the idea of a sprout popping out of its seed casing. Seeds usually push out roots, and then there's a couple of big seed leaves inside the shell of the seed that catch sunlight and start making energy for proper leaves to form. Gurr doesn't set down roots, nor does it have leaves, but it does have this massive, angry shoot that launches itself out into the sun through the mouth hole in Gurr's seed casing. It's smooth all over, except it still has those pointy hands and the point on its head. It's definitely the awkward stage between seed and fully functioning plant, meaning we definitely have one more stage to go once this thing is done. And here we have Gurr, the spike Pokemon. Gurr burst from their hard shell armor in a fit of rage one day and can't quite manage to get back in. Making this point of irritation everyone else's problem is one of their favorite pastimes. They love hot sun and dry sand, and if they get too much water, they get ill. It's still a grass and fighting type with that custom ability Burst. The name Gurr is just grow, but with Gurr up front because this Gurr has grown. It's not massive by any means, but a good size bigger than Gurr was. And here are your stats and moves. A relatively standard progression moves-wise, but you'll notice its defense stat has lowered compared to the last form. This is a Trapinch to Vibrava style situation, because it has lost the protectiveness of that spiky shell all over its body. It's just not as resilient as it once was. But hopefully we'll see a good sized boost once it evolves again. So, of course, after encountering all of these monsters, your Jasper starters are looking to evolve. I did a poll asking all you trainers which of these three you'd pick, and Upper Pup knocked it out of the park. Thanks to everyone who took the time to vote. So we will start there. Upper Pup's evolution needed to be an escalation in both design and attitude. I love the swooping V shapes that show up in most coyote pelts, and so I extended the markings that Upper Pup had into big swooshes of fur. The orange becomes a darker red. The key change is in its attitude. It goes from stoic to infuriated. I wanted to make it look defensive and ready to strike with that tail, maybe with some kind of flicker jab. It was also important for me to keep this guy a quadruped. I always hate being duped into thinking a Pokemon is going to be a cool four-legged beastie only for it to wind up as Macho Man Randy Savage in a fursuit. So I pledge to you that this fighting canine will remain with all 4 feet firmly on the ground. The ears were looking too long and rabbity, so I slashed off some length, but kept those rough scalloped edges that are supposed to look like they've seen a lot of damage. And here we have Puppercut, the Overcome Pokemon. Once old enough to leave their pack, these Pokemon realize life is hard, and they develop a very eat or be eaten approach to life. A kind and strong trainer can mellow out these instinctive feelings, however, and produce a fighter with a more balanced mindset. It does remain pure fighting, and retains all of its abilities from before as well. It gains a bit of size, but not much. It is the smallest of our 3 middle evolutions. Why? Well, I just love me a scrappy little underdog, that's all. Besides, we haven't seen the final evolutions yet, so there's still time for our guy here to take on some size. Stats and moves. A fairly good increase in ability across the board, but with some helpful new moves added. So, as per the poll, Torble came in second. Let's take it on next. Torble's fortification has increased since evolving. Not only has it put on some massive size, but those pebble-looking scales have migrated into the shell and become rocky spines. When it withdraws into its shell, it will no longer be indistinguishable from a rock, unfortunately, but it will be able to repel many attackers with some additional fortification. The color palette is the same. As mentioned in its inspirations in the last video, I just really love the gradation of orange down through cream. I think the dark brown of the spots and spikes breaks it up a good amount though. It might have grown in size and defensive capability, but it's still just as happy and carefree as before. No thoughts detected. And here we have Tortoiseshell, the roaming rock Pokemon. Tortoiseshell find it hard to retreat into their shells, meaning they will try to run or fight instead of hide should they be threatened. This is not ideal, as they are fairly gentle creatures who don't often feel a need to harass other Pokemon, and this can lead to some species regarding them as an easy target. It remains a pure rock type and gains a lot of size. It's the biggest of the 3 middle stage starters. It does keep the same abilities as before as well. Here are your stats and moves. Still a defensive wall, but with a few attacking moves and a lot of defensive options. Alright, last monster of the video. Cuticle came in last in the poll, so it comes in last here as well. Sorry, birdie buddy, the people have spoken. To be fair, this is probably the most linear line so far. Chick loses those oranges and the pink hue to the beak pretty quickly, and so does Cuticle's evolution. It goes into a more black and white territory, except for those green feet, which I boosted the armor-like scales on, and I gave them some additional talent. So, relatively minor changes overall. Oh, and those wings develop some extra heft as this thing becomes a more proficient flyer. That attitude, though, it remains mostly unchanged. And here we have Cootalon, the scout Pokemon. Cootalon are extremely inquisitive Pokemon. Now that they can fly more freely and with more skill, they will disappear for hours at a time if left untended. However, they will always return to their flock or trainer, and often with news of things that they've seen. It's still a pure flying type, and abilities remain unchanged. It grows a little bit in size, but not much in weight. Here are stats and moves. Again, a relatively linear progression. And there you have it, trainers, some more Jasper Pokemon. I hope you like these goobers. We still have a bunch from the first video to evolve, and we definitely will in the next video. But in the meantime, I hope you had fun. I'm looking forward to catching you in the next one, trainers. But till then, take care. Bye.